Friends, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to this session of Land Matters Professor D.B. Gupta. For those of you who are not aware, Professor Gupta is, by academic training, he's an economist, with a PhD from Birmingham. But for many of us, he's better known as a doyen of urban studies in India. In the urban sector, he's been a towering figure who's really been someone who's really set the bar very high on both achievements and the kind of advice he's given and the kind of work he's done. Professor Gupta has been with the NCER for about a decade now, couple of decades plus 2 years, I'm so sorry. And before that, he's been with IEG for a long time. He's been in between, off and on, advising the World Bank, the Planning Commission, and before that with the NIUA too. At some stage.
NIPFP, 4 years and 4 years.
So he's covered the wealth of, the whole range of institutions which have dealt with, especially with issues of the urban in India, with all the relevant think tanks, till of course IHS came to He has a large number of books to his credit. I'm not going to name them, but certainly if you look for urban housing in India, you'll find his name crops up every time. My personal association makes me extremely proud to be here to introduce him today, because for the last few years I have worked in close contact with Professor Gupta in some work which I've been doing with NCER. It has made me a firm admirer of a person who I think is a great role model as I advance in years. Extremely active mentally, and a great person as a human being to work with. He's made me conscious not only about the need to stay active mentally, but how to be a real gentleman in every sense of the word. He has this amazing ability to convey his point with the least element of discourtesy to anybody. And yet, with all his tolerance for people's foibles, he can gently convey that inefficiency and mediocrity are not appreciated. I have thoroughly enjoyed his company over the years, and I hope that we will get a flavor of that as he talks about his life and times today, and we will all get to learn and see how we can also move on in years in a way that is admirable. Thank you for coming today, Professor Gupta.
For a guy put in a dustbin to be invited to come and speak at this place is a great personal honor and privilege for me. And particularly I remember a poem which I read in my class 7th or 8th called An Ancient Mariner, where an ancient mariner will never get satisfied until he found somebody as a victim to tell his story of the albatross, what happened over the period of time. So it's one of those storytellers who always wants an audience, a small one, not this large one, to speak and talk. And so thank you, Amnon. And Deepak, thank you for your very, very kind words. I don't know how much of it I deserve, but thank you indeed. And particularly, you see, I've worked extensively in housing, urban area, urban domain, land, etc., but not as a domain expert. I've never been trained, as Deepak rightly mentioned, as kind of remain both a gypsy in terms of my job assignment as well as in terms of my own training. Started as learned physics, moved on to engineering, The IIT had just come up way back in 1951. I was the third batch. Came back to Delhi, started a small unit of electroplating in the industrial area in West Delhi. I was cheated. I mean, because my partner, after some time, he took advantage of my expertise and qualification, and after a while I found that I didn't have anything, and that's when I, by accident, a very distinguished economist called V.K.R.V. Rao, who was a close friend of my father, said, "Why is he sitting home?" So he narrated a brief this anecdote and said, "Oh, come to the Delhi School of Economics," and that's where my journey in the field of economics started. But I would say I was able to get everything. I was able to get a fellowship. I was able to get a PhD. But I don't think I ever kind of acquired the kind of knowledge that a guy like Partho Das Gupta or Amartya Sen or Sukhmay Chakravarti would have, but definitely achieved all that I could. I remained gypsy, moved from one discipline to another, was invited to good universities like Yale and Cambridge, etc., but never got sold to one thing except my wife, where I remain a good friend for the last 56, 57 years. I've never left her company. So I think, so what I speak will be my work experience, and will not have the kind of knowledge of a domain expert. I can take the credit of the first PhD from the School of Planning and Architecture, Dr. Pramila Suri. There was no PhD program there, and it was just Poonam, who is currently the head of the SPA, one of the planning divisions. So all these people, many of them worked with me, and I remained associated with the SPA for a very long time. And that was another place where I interacted with people, learned a great deal. People were presenting their PhD proposals, and with that, you learned a lot about these kind of, the finer points of urban planning and things like that. But my real thing, apart from my own personal story, which I would take up later, was not a very highly respected person, but a very distinguished person called H.K.L. Bhagat. He was the Minister for Housing at that time, and I was attending a seminar, and he and Jagmohan ji, they persuaded me to take up a study on squatter settlements and urbans. Now, this was my first major formal introduction to the subject. At that time, our Delhi, means this side of Jamuna, started walking across the Jamuna. Otherwise, there was this Lakshmi Nagar and so on and so forth, which were basically, kind of slums, garbages, or whatever you like to call it. They were low-lying areas, and yet they were quite inexpensive. So many people went there, but the first squatter settlements came up across the Jamuna, and people were moved there. Now, so he asked me to kind of study the whole Delhi's housing, why the rents were increasing and what was happening and so on and so forth. And that really gave me some insights into the issues relating to housing and land. What I on a human ground, what I found that many of the squatters who were extremely helpful for our day-to-day life were removed from here long distances. Unlike now when you have these metros and so on and so forth, the transportation, public transport or anything was, one, by and large non-existent, two, it was quite expensive. So the net result was that people who lived on this side, our lives became very expensive. So we didn't know what to do. And I think, and they also didn't know where to get. Eventually what they did was to sell off their, whatever on power of attorney, some on share trust and things like that. The net result, when we conducted this study in 1970, between 1973 1976, of course the book came out, was that almost 60-65% were already occupied by people other than the original allottees. And and in Selampur, which is just across Jamna near the thing, is that in those days for 80 square yards and 40 square yards and so on and so forth, they started joining them together, and some people started buying them, and they were turning into fairly, not posh, but good and expensive housing, rental and so on and so forth. So this was another thing that was very interesting, that can the squatters settle? Now, as an economist, I say it doesn't really matter. Just create supply, make it abundant. So one day or the other, the the prices will come down. There will be takers of those, and they will not be left vacant and things like that. Now, this is one way of looking at it, that why stop these things. Simultaneously, because those squatters were coming back, was the other phenomenon, that political patronage and local patronage started helping, and slums and other phenomena started taking place. And now this was something which was not to the liking, and the mafia became pretty active, and with the collusion of the police and other bodies, they started things. Most of you would be aware how the slums are formed, so I'm not going into that. But the provocation, the way the slums came, was a very interesting one. I mean, in Delhi, I mean, this is not just it came, and then there were lands. The owners of the land did not quite know that the land belonged to them. In fact, the mafia knew a bit more than what the real owners of the land knew. I mean, there were as many as 15 to 20 agencies, whether it was railways, defense, government, local governments and so on and so forth. So there were multiple agencies which really had ownership of this, but they didn't know. And even the private land, particularly institutional land of schools, etc., was being illegally occupied by these people, and there was a huge help. And that's where the political patronage began. I mean, and that's where even H.K.L. Bhagat comes into picture, that he himself was supporting, please don't remove them, this, that, and kind of this thing. Everyone became a part and parcel of the patronage that they were offering. But then this was the whole thing. Then later on, subsequently, I'll move on to the other topic. So let me finish out this. We moved on to the operational research. We formed what was called an NGO, Paryavaran. Now, this is documented in one of my books called the Housing Dailies Millions. I mean, basically which also studies the renters, the living conditions, and the whole things way back in 1975-76 by National Buildings Organization and the Ministry of Housing. Subsequently, we took to this thing, and one of the first colonies that we took was Harinagar, what we call the Prayog Vihar, and Dusib, Delhi, urban, whatever. It was called the slum board in those days, now is Dusib. And so we formed a kind of an NGO comprising of the Commissioner Slums, Registrar Delhi Cooperatives, a Joint Secretary from the Ministry of Home Affairs, and one Mr. Mehra. He was again an IES. So we were 5 who formed this Paryavaran, and I don't know whether it exists or not, but this was a registered society, and we started operating. And the first we did was the Prayog Vihar. Now this was a huge piece of school land, and it took us a long time to persuade both the school authorities, the slum dwellers, and others to kind of cooperate. And we said, please secede a part of your land. So the school authorities agreed. There was no school. It was a land meant for the school dwellers. So a strip was given where we were able to accommodate, and the School of Planning and Architecture was used to draw, little drawings and so on and so forth for that strip of land. And so Slum Board gave some money, and with that we were able to create a Prayog Vihar. And encouraged by that little success, and the design the school people, SPA, made was very interesting. There was a homogeneous kind of people, 7 to 10 people in that each thing, with 2 toilet septic ones in each zone, and they were there, just single story, and which could go up to the 2nd floor also. So that came up, and we were encouraged by that, and then we started operating in the other one, which is called the Ekta Vihar. Now Ekta Vihar is near the Hyatt Regency. If you, it's more opposite the entry point on the other side of the road, entry point of the passport office. So we worked there with about 400 families, and we were eventually able to get them. Now the point that I'm trying to make there is that for the first time we really took some definite measures to create a cooperative structure for housing. This was the first formal cooperative housing laws approved by the government for the poor. There were no such laws prior to that. So this is the first time that they got it approved, and then the cooperative and limited tenures was given to them. I don't know what happened after that. We also left. We just moved like the gypsies. And the third one was Ashanti Vihar, where the South Indians, the North Indians, and all kinds of people lived. And there was a constant, this is in R.K. Puram, and there was a constant fight amongst them, and eventually, they got. Then we studied a few other things, the Christian boards and other things. And now this is documented in a book called Housing and the Urban Poor. So that was the second one. Around this time, a little around that time, this is the time I was teaching at Yale in the US, And that's when my journey on the urban side began, particularly the water side. But the housing was the urban housing. They asked me, there was a guy called Edwin Mills, I don't know whether you've read his book, his Princeton had, and also he supervised Rakesh Mohan, who is a very distinguished urban person, for his PhD at Princeton. And so they asked me to go and be a discussant for his seminar in Washington DC. So flew from New Haven to that place. And that's when they asked me if I would do some kind of a write-up on urban housing. Now, it was a 45 days consulting, which took me like 30 months to kind of finish that off. At that time, NSS data all were scattered. This is the first, I take pride in that, the first systematic work on urban housing in India, where I also brought in the issue of unit for the property tax unit price. And so way back in 1985, there is a 7 staff working paper, about 200 pages plus, number 730, which again is on the website, freely available. And it's also published in Spanish. And they started treating me as some kind of an urban person. I don't know why, because there was nothing urban. It was no formal training in urban. As you can see, it was doing little work as a good statistician, as a good academia, but not as an urbanologist as yet. And then in out of nowhere, 1990, they asked me to join the Planning Commission as advisor, urban development. The only little introduction was I worked for a while for Rakesh Mohan when he was senior consultant or whatever it is with the Planning Commission in the 80s. So I worked with him, and then I was asked, and then they had to do what was called the 8th 5-year plan. I mean, the 6th and the 7th were over. So I did that chapter for the 8th plan. That was 1 year, and after that, I again got diverted. It's my biographical sketch anyway. So I got diverted to my good friend, a very, very distinguished demographer called Ashish Bose. He superannuated. He persuaded me to leave the Planning Commission and join back the Institute of Economic Growth. I moved into the health sector around that time because population and health was closely linked, and fortunately the World Bank did not have a health economist, so they treated me as a health economist, and I collected enough money for myself for my rest of the life. I mean, I worked on reproductive and child health, as the author of the first RCH, a member of the team for the second reproductive and child health project, ICDS, and so anything that you have in the health sector, DB Gupta was there. Okay, so I don't want to talk about that. But now I wrote a small piece at that time, very small, kind of a more in the form of a few, I mean, I don't know. It was something to do with water. And I said, why the hell water was taken out of the health sector? Now, suddenly, the guys in the bank, I got their attention, and delivered my first international address, I mean in water, at Dublin. Now this was the international conference, and this was immediately after the Prime Minister of Ireland had spoken. It was widely televised, and I became a domain expert in the water for some time, and I did a lot of work on water reliability issues, willingness to pay water issues, and things like that. So that is another part which is and also the importance of 24/7 supply. I'm still I'm willing to take up argument with anybody on a 24/7. I mean, technologically speaking, I mean, apart from other things, we did the reliability issues. We thought it was a far more expensive proposition to kind of people for them to individually have buckets and water and put them there and waste their morning hours and evening hours collecting water, apart from the pipes corroding in the meantime that it remained without water, and then when you leave the water, the water pressure works on the joints, and there was a quite leakage of water and even a overflow of water. So I mean, so I would say kind of worked on those days for quite a while on pollution abatement and things like that, and so this is not 100% urban, but this was water and sanitation became a passion for some time. I worked also for the WSP in Delhi and for the urban infrastructure division at Washington DC, and so. But now comes my second avatar, or the next avatar. I got superannuated in '96, joined the National Council of Economic Research, where you had Rakesh Mohan as the director at that point of time, and he clearly we came to know each other more on the urban field than on the other kind of a thing, and he asked me to kind of this. So I restarted doing some work on. So one of the first things that I got was a call from Anil Baijal to draft the first plan, to prepare the first draft of the 2021 Delhi Master Plan. Now this was where I came in contact with all kinds of people in the area of urban field, NIUA very closely, SPA closely, and other people, and there was the Dada, there was the Bijrani, and there was the Mahesh Bhuj, and there was the Muhammad something, Rafiq or Shafiq, I mean, they were all DDA people, and so I did the first draft. Later on, of course, there was a process where I was not at all involved, and so the first, but few features were taken. One of the things that we had recommended was, I don't know whether it was right or wrong, they said there should be a review of the plan every 5 years, formally. This I thought, we thought, how for 20 years you hang on to something. But I didn't quite realize that eventually what would happen, that vested interests would become active, and in the name of this flexibility and so on, so they would start screwing up the plan. So I don't know what has happened to that, but I've seen the final plan and so on and so forth. So and I'm also on the advisory committee of the LG, which does a review. So one can see that a lot of pressures and other things were that one has to kind of. So the original shape really undergoes a change. I don't know whether for the good or for the worse, but these things do happen. Around this time, when this guy LG prior to Tejinder Khanna. Tejinder Khanna. He was the LG, and he asked us to take up a study on land pooling. That meant a great deal of work. So there's another colleague of mine, Dr. Shank Bhide, who is now shifted to Chennai as the director of the Madras Institute of Development Studies. So we did that, and that was a great experience. Lots of people would come to us from the farmer side with their representations and things like that, and issues of FAR and how much to part with and so on and so forth came. And when the whole thing was finally approved, we thought that we were fooled completely. So there was a huge land mafia which is operating. There was a huge political patronage. Hopefully I shouldn't speak on the thing, but I'm willing to defend myself. And negotiations on FAR, negotiations on the common areas and things like that. So then it's at that time that we realized that these are not purely technical matters. And that's how it should be. Why should they be purely technical matters? Because after all, the judgment has to be taken by the community at large, which means the political leaders, the bureaucrats and everybody. But we technocrats sometimes feel too passionate about what we do. So I think this is one thing which I would exhort, that we should do what we think is judicious, is correct from a technical viewpoint. But then the final decision has to rest with the policymakers. We can't really be, because they have to take into account several other things which we as technocrats are not able to quite take them into account. So we should not be too passionate. We should be very passionate that the work that we do is technically sound, correct, and so on. For example, earlier we had provided for 5 to 7 years of the time period between taking over and doing the thing. But eventually, when we heard the constituency of property, imagine, you have to have this clearance, you have to have that clearance, and then they said you also have to have clearance from the heavens. So I asked, what is this heaven? He says, this aviation industry is the new one that you have to take clearance from, apart from fire clearance and things like that. So it takes a lot of time. So be realistic. Don't in the beginning just make it 5 and say up to 7 years. It doesn't make a sense. And which we realized later on that it was the correct thing. So the point that I'm trying to make is that as technocrats, let's not get blood pressures if what we say is not accepted. We did some study where one of our friends here also participated, was auction prices and things like that. The DDA work, extensive work that we did, was on pricing, which was one of the very interesting and very we really did more than a PhD work on that, and it's technically one of the sound ones. We hope it's in the public domain. It is in the public domain, but we don't have the money to print it and make it available, accessible and large number of times. Simultaneously, the private sector got interested, and we did some study for the Larsen and Toubro on housing, affordable housing. And now this affordable housing is something which is a myth to me. What is affordable, for whom it is affordable, and so on and so forth. And it still remains a myth, but we did that. And what we did a huge data analysis of the census and of the income one. And we found that the class that one should really approach today is the class like you people, young, earning, and everything, so that you can repay the money and so forth. So this is my, and then came my new the third avatar, where I'm trying to learn from my guru Deepak Sanam on land title, land issues, which are the hardcore issues, and we hope we'll have opportunities, inshallah. 85 is I'm 85 years young, so we'll have opportunities to work together for many more years, right? Yeah, we're trying to do that. Aside, I just want to kind of share with you how I personally got interested into the whole area, which is a story which I have shared with some, but not with many, was my student days. And every other day I would ask every month some fees from my father, tuition fees, some pocket money. So one day he got so fed up, he gave me 1,000 rupees. And that money was good enough to make me an owner of a piece of land in Greater Kailash. Right, Deepak? 240 rupees you could buy a piece of land, 300 square yards in GK1 Greater Kailash, plot number C109. So 245 or 245, yeah, rupees. Was the first installment, and I became an owner. And then I got in touch with a property dealer who just called me up every other day. आज सर 100 रुपया मिल रहा है फालतू, 50 रुपया फालतू मिल रहा है. तो हम, the accessibility was not so easy in those days. But I lived in Daryagan in those days, so it was not too bad. But it would come, collect my money, and then eventually I would have been neighbor of Deepak if I had not sold off my N258B. But eventually we decided to move on to the Great Kailash 2, liquidated everything. And that's where we learned that that plot of land was with my brother. I said, मेरा तो 2 बेटी है, अगर कुछ हो गया तो अपना बेटे को दे देगा, मैं क्या करूँ? These are very important, critical issues in whole lot of, so हमने कहा छोड़ो यार, अकेला जाके मकान बनाओ. And so I went and constructed a house in GK2 where I lived, sold off other pieces of land. But I think I'll leave something for our discussion.
I have two lines of question. One is historical. Wanted to know more about the National Commission for Urbanization. You just touched on it. So the Charles Korea Committee report, that was considered a seminal kind of policy moment, so to speak. And I think it was when Manmohan Singh was the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission, I think, at that time.
I worked with him, yeah.
Yeah. So there was a lot of things which were kind of finally connects a couple of decades later.
And which Ashish was also a member, NCU, National Commission on Urbanization.
So that's my first thing. If you could just elaborate a little more on what was going on there. We can see in our kind of notes that, lots of very illustrious people are consultants or all of that. And there were 5 seminal volumes which were produced from the Charles Committee report.
I know.
So that's one. The second line of question is to probe further on this technocrat versus, shall we say, the politics around, political economy, call it whatever. The technocratic imagination being technical and professional, and so two competing, shall we say, notions of what is right in a way. And sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. And did you have the opportunity of kind of going over to the other side and actually Because this keeps coming up in planning, that the master plan, for all its faults, is the good thing to do.
I'll take the second question first. I'll confirm. My only thing was for a brief period at the Planning Commission, which was a year or so, and the second one was at the University of Delhi when I was heading the planning unit there, the entire planning operations and so. So these were my two. One, I was pretty early, in my early 30s, I just began 30s, and later this was Planning Commission thing. I mean, this is something where I never accept that doing the drafting and so on. I never took any great interest. So, I mean, I have felt that having been working mostly technical areas, different things, I never wore a hat of a decision maker, like for example Deepak and so on and so forth, but I never wore that hat. But I always had a feeling that whenever our recommendations, our things were criticized or done anything, I always felt that the points that were made by politicians or by bureaucrats had some element of truth, and therefore to dismiss them or to raise one's blood pressure for no reason is of no consequence. I would do my work in a very, very proper way and ensure that I can justify, and yet there can be holes in it, and I should be able to address those holes. And despite that, political arithmetic counts. You lose votes. For example, in the housing, my first work on housing, there is millions. I had written a word called, these are kind of vote banks. That H.K.L. Bhagat approved of everything, but he asked me to remove that little phrase, vote banks. So I don't know whether I should have done it or should have raised my voice, what authority. He would have kept quiet, he would have allowed us to do that, but I don't feel that I lost very much in dropping that. So this was one. The university, I have had a lot of experience at a fairly young age, early 30s. I was heading the planning unit, as also the chairman of the university construction and building committee. And so at that time and that was also the phase, after a long time, Sir Maurice Goyer, that the university saw a redevelopment. The university library, the expansion of the arts faculty, construction of the Shankalal Concert Hall, construction of the two major hostels for the men and the women, and construction of for the class 3-4 quarters, which were never there. They were there only juggies and jobbies. So these were 5 or 6 steps, and then a lot of land was taken away from us. Now that's when I came in conflict with the police lines. It's it's just as you go towards Kingsway Camp, from Miranda House and Patel Chase, walk down, you have the police lines. Now that land belonged to the University of Delhi. So then I negotiated, we were able to get some low-lying areas of land. So that was another thing which I came, and I knew that we will not be able to win the case, so we preferred to negotiate and get alternative piece of land from them. Then I learned that people, institutions were wasting a lot of money, which didn't, I mean, they liked the idea is that every college was having an assembly hall or a massive, big hall. It was a campus, everybody spending tons and tons of money on building an assembly or whatever called the huge hall for 500, 600 or 800 people as assembly hall. But I thought that was a bit of a, because I did actual analysis and I found that on the average the usage was very, very little. So it was waste of, then the grounds, use of the grounds. Actually, I suffered a great deal way back in 1948 when Mr. Gandhi died. We were playing cricket at the same ground that the current Samadhi lives. And then the police and other authorities came and removed us from there. And the Jamna River used to run along that place. And there were these doodhwalas and everybody. We were just pushed out of that and we didn't know where to go. Then eventually we were given some piece of land for the schools at Morigate, Tikona Park, as you enter the alleys. So I mean, those are the kind of issues that one were exposed to, and this is a bit of a learning also, that some of the common facilities should not be duplicated, where we could really economize on a national basis. But on your other thing, this NCU thing, there's such huge pieces of land, and as I said, I never was interested, except to the extent that my friend Ashish was interested. So I bought those 4, 5, 6 volumes of this, which eventually I had to throw them out about 3, 4 years back because there was a.
But in terms of when you look back, do you think that was historically, because that's the first kind of point of reference?
Which really, yeah. But it wasn't debated enough. It wasn't debated enough. I was a member of the technical committee for V.K. Malhotra Committee on Property Tax. And when the question was being discussed about constant review and revision of the property tax, there was a lot of opposition. And two counts. One was, this is when the unit thing came. So I argued that today I spent something. Yes, 10 years ago somebody else had made the house. But both of us are using the same infrastructure, civic infrastructure. Yes, some allowance must be given because he had constructed at that time and so on and so forth. So you devise your own criteria. But why should I pay? Because when I had almost heart ache or so. 73,000 was the first property tax bill that I received from my house. Now this was my gross. In those days, the salaries used to be very, very small. So 73,000 was the bill raised for that thing. So I didn't know. So fortunately, at that time, V.C. Chaturvedi was the assessor and collector, and I was on this committee. So later on, we were able to kind of persuade him. I was not, to begin with, I was not under the unit value. So he reduced it to 16,000 something. So, for people, kind of. Couple of other things that I just want to mention is that in our time, you have to have huge amount of money to be a homeowner. There were no, until about the mid-70s, the fund availability was very limited. You have to have your own house. You have to have your own funds. You collect over a period of time. You get your provident fund and other things, and you put it into the housing, and then your children would shoot you. Just go to hell. You are a Buddha. Get out. So that was one major issue, which fortunately now, you have this home loans and other things. Second thing which I forgot, where I played a very significant role, was the setting up of the National Housing Bank. I was a part of the initial committee which went into the whole thing, and the secondary mortgage markets. I mean, one day people called me from the finance ministry. They did not quite understand what was a secondary mortgage market. I mean, what was this. So these were the kind of things which really happened. But over the period of time, I mean, but even now, if you want to buy a piece of land, there is no financing is available for the purchase of land. For the purchase of a house, you can, but even today, you have to have so much of money. I go to England to teach. 10%, and which university gave me. On the first day, first show, you have a flat. And the whole system was so easy, and the transaction costs were nowhere. We did one study for the National Housing Bank, which I didn't unfortunately have, because we worked extensively for the National Housing Bank. And we found that it was as much as 14 to 17% of the cost, transaction costs of various kinds that add up. Now this is unbelievable. Housing for the poor is difficult, but housing for the low income classes is possible, because what we can do and what is being done in UK, if you look at the history of the lending of the building societies in the UK, you find what they do is to give loans through the employers, and the collection is done by the employer, and the whole sum is deposited by the employer with the housing or with the building society. The net result is that there is no, the cost of collection is very little. There is no question of a default or anything of that kind, and it really works well. And then they say, okay, for this we give you 1% less. I mean, we charge you 1% less for interest, and then they are able to persuade the employers to also give 1 or 2% by way, so that the institutional housing is not important for them, private housing. So, I mean, that was the other thing. I mean, Western models are not always easy to practice, but of course, like the county housing that they have had, which they eventually turn into rental housing, and finally, hire purchase, you become ownership basis, you could get that. And but the other issues of the wholesale in Delhi, I mean other places also, is the wholesale acquisition of the land without the capacity to develop and release it at regular intervals, so that the land prices, Deepak, they just shut up. I mean, if you can see that this lack of capacity on the part, and they hold a huge piece of land which remains undeveloped, they don't have the capacity, and so on and so forth. So this is yet another area in urban field, where one has to kind of, to what extent these authorities have the right to kind of, and then we have problems like in Delhi. I have not mentioned, I've worked somewhere, because in Pune, etc., about this solid waste management and things like that. There the problem was very acute when I went there. It was basically, the Air Force flights and so forth, and those birds, etc. So it was causing a lot of nuisance, and so I think from that viewpoint. Then the problem of the flat land, like Delhi, drainage, etc., is not an easy task. So these are also the issues which one has to kind of think about, and this FAR is a very ridiculous one, 150, 200. I mean, some of the countries have 30 kind of affair. I mean, here I don't know why. So there is a land shortage. So,
So what about this housing thing? So there's this common knowledge that the private sector won't be interested, not viable for the private sector to be interested in where the greatest need is. So as you said that affordable, what is affordable has become a myth. People would perhaps tell us.
they will go. You see, they are going in for affordable, like for example, they advertise at 3,500 rupees a square feet constructed area. So people are going there. Like as an investor, I went to this Bhiwadi. I got it for 4,500 rupees, I don't know. I bought a piece of a flat at that and made some money out of it. You can do that. Because affordable now in our area and your area is about 18 to 25,000 rupees a square feet.
I meant it the other way around, which is that there seems to be an acknowledgement that finally you cannot build your way out of this 18 million, 20 million shortage. That if you acknowledge that people will incrementally build up.
This is not possible. It is what we did way back in the 80s.
We talked about G+3, that's why I'm asking.
So what we did was income elasticity, what is my affordability in terms of, so I will live in a house that I can afford. And if it's a garbage, I'll live with the garbage. So Rakesh Mohan did a very, very interesting exercise on this, which was a realistic one. This is, unless the government, like in Italy, once they did it, you saturate the housing market with the supply, construct irrespective of the need and so on and so forth. And demand will come.
So, but that would lead to empty apartments, no?
For some time. Slowly, gradually, the prices will start coming down and it will become affordable. Mad. If I sell off my house, I can buy a house in Manhattan and in New York, and still get some money and things like that. It's just ridiculous market. Like for example in Alaknanda, minimum 2.5 crore for a 3-bedroom flat. Minimum. I'm not saying that's, if you're lucky you can get it, but otherwise it's about 3 crores, which means $500,000. Deepak, this is the kind of a situation, it's mindless, no relationship with reality.
But even the state in India, even China is sort of a bit concerned about the amount of units which have come up which are unoccupied. Here we would have one more concern. The moment the state invests, we don't even know the quality of what will be there. How long will it even last empty? It can just fall in no time. It will just crumble.
Or like the Indra Awas Yojana, there'll be warehouses for the food grains and things like that.
Yeah, or you'll end up, we've seen that whatever limited amount which private sector has put into India is just resulting in immediate.
And total sanitation campaign I haven't seen, but the earlier one that I had examined, I found that these toilets that they had built were built, in small places for the poor, and they were used for storehouses and things like that, and rightly so, because there was no water and nothing of that kind. And even if there was water, you see, they would stink. The hut is here, and there is this toilet. Now, you can live for 1 or 2 days. Maybe it was used for the oldies and the ones who are kind of unable to move. But largely, under the total sanitation campaign, what was happening is they have had many Nirmal awards, but those even the Nirmal award villages had this kind of a situation, and then there was this kind of a thing. You had your water here, and your toilet here, and after a year or so, if you go and see your drinking water, take a tube and put it there, you will find it's contaminated because although beachment distance of 6 feet or whatever the norm is, धीरे धीरे उसको फट करके उसके अंदर चला जाता है, So I mean, those are the kind of real problems, that community thing. I saw it in Guna, for example, in Madhya Pradesh. That was quite a success because what they did was the local people who were scavengers were put there, and they got their earnings from that, and so it was a reasonably, at least at that time when we reviewed it, it was. But then the village has to agree to give common land for this purpose, which is not always easy. And yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, sorry, I'm just taking up space. Please, anybody else is this person? Is my interest is in ethnography, sociology. So for me, the externalities become very important. So, to what extent do you bring that on in your basic stuff? For example, things like in urban caste, for example, just shut out for a long time. I think people realize that certain occupations are entirely caste-driven, that the rural is getting reproduced in the urban, etc. Caste is one. We could talk about any forms of whatever other things. So it's not just a question of saying, okay, it will be captured by some patronage group or the other, but in the very kind of identification of the problem itself, it seems to be kind of, on one hand you want to do a good job technically, and at the other hand you feel that there is an elephant in the room which you don't want to you want to ignore, but at the same time it's staring at you in the face. So in research design, sir, how do you kind of
what the exercises SPA people did for the Prog Vihar or what we did for the Ekta Vihar, what we did was the allotment of the houses were for people from the same community in each kind of a thing, and that to an extent solved the problem. But we learned later on there were problems, so they would remain. I see even like, why am I playing music at 11 o'clock in the night is a problem to a neighbor. And we are playing a normal piano or something like that, but they object to it because they think they have muscles. Actually happening. So these are the kind of no, there are issues which are really candidates for good research, good work, and so on and so forth, where one must kind of really look into it. What Deepak had just mentioned, value capture. I mean, is an area particularly for raising funds for infrastructure financing and things like that is one issue which I think one really ought to think a lot how to finance infrastructure, and value capture is certainly one of them on which somebody should take a more dedicated, concerted study on value capture, and also both as a technical study and also as an advocacy instrument to kind of work with the local governments, The issue of the urban local bodies have completely, although I worked extensively in my NIPFP stay of 4 years, but I thought it would become too heavy, so I have not touched on that. Municipal finances, urban local bodies, finances, and things like that is certainly another area which should not be just because we are either economists or architects, we should ignore, I think. Is an area which I thought should really be municipal finances, certainly the area which one should. Yeah.
So, one question I want to ask with respect to, we talked about introducing more inventory in the market, or increasing affordable housing. So, to what extent is the pressure that is there on resources and infrastructure? I mean, not just on the land, but also associated resources as well as infrastructure is taken into account, because I haven't worked in urban sector, but what things that kind of stand out and bother me is that when we have these big housing projects.
Good question. You see, one of the things is the complete, although there is a continual review and revision of the building bylaws, but the use of the alternative building materials is again a very, very critical issue, particularly when you mention this thing. The non-conventional materials, you can't use it, and so the will not be permitted and things. So which makes housing beyond many people. So I think particularly in the context of the housing for the low and even lower classes, I think some amount of serious debate, and these people are so hung up. You go to the corporations and you talk to those people, those who revise. Deepak would be aware, but I have seen the deliberations in the Delhi Municipal Corporation when these building bylaws are taken. They will not even budge an inch from their stated positions. So it's and others like we were taken as kind of outsiders, as not as observers but as part of it, but we are shut up. So I think there is a very in the literature itself. I mean, I'm sure the architects would have seen that there is a huge talk about the use of the non-conventional building materials, but the building bylaws don't easily permit. I mean, even in the northeast, it's not so easy. I mean, now I hear that you can do that and so on and so forth. But that's what I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is one area, the overhaul of the entire way our thinking is on the building bylaws and use of the building materials. I mean, should completely change.
Just based on what you said, do you feel that there has been and there continues to be a complete disconnect of the state machinery, or say the bureaucracy, from how the market works in terms of how we are designing these policies, and we still continue to see the same issues in terms of the housing gap that exists? And since you've worked on this a lot, if you can tell that, where do you think in terms of designing our policies have we gone so wrong that we still continue to see the same issues?
My first encounter in this area was 1969-70, and this is now 2019 kind of a thing. So 50 years. Same muscles, same power, same thinking. And if someone says, you're not a domain person, just remain outside. अभी बच्चे हो, थोड़ा समझो, अभी आपको समझने का ज़रूरत है. वो समझते ही नहीं हम, जब हम 100 का भी हो जाएंगे तो भी हमको यही कहना पड़ेगा कि दीपक, you are the best person to say on that. I mean, you are a rare outlier, but then this is what it is. It's not any innovative, any good idea. It's just shot down. It's not easy to convince. Now that's where I think our strategy should be to work slowly on people. We come up with very drastic, diametrically opposite solutions, which they are unable to absorb. So I think if somebody can work slowly on people, maybe it works. You see, another thing that I forgot to mention is the complete, this Mahila Housing Trust and other things that I reviewed, and also other schemes, is complete lack of skilled labor in the construction sector. It is one, yet another area, I'm glad that this question has reminded me of this, is automation hardly, and those are not even good men. Plumbers, to go to Odisha, bring some paddy or some or somebody, so बस उधर से मिलेगा आपको, कहीं पर भी you can't get a plumber, good plumber, और आएगा तो plumber fit करके और चला जाएगा, and then third day your water is leaking. So these are kind of plumbing is like in medicine, anesthesia and lab attendants lab assistants are the two deficit areas in masons, plumbers, etc. are some of the very deficit areas which need to be very, very on its own, not as a jumble shumble kind of a thing, but as in its own right should be raised as an issue. I don't know, it's just fitting, and you become a kind of a thing. And when a plumber comes, he'll look. So most of the building skills. Then there's another issue that I want to raise it, and since you are all urban areas, is the analysis of the tenders. Tender analysis, everyone should have an idea how tender analysis is done. Because this is one that I learned at a fairly early age. वो तो बुद्धू बना देगा contractor. One contractor came for a building very substantially low rate, so L1, तो मिलना चाहिए उसको. So when I asked the chief engineer of the university to analyze it, he said, सर तो ठीक है. तो हम कहे तुमको कुछ पैसे मिला है? कहते हैं नहीं साहब, बिल्कुल है, ये हुआ है. You see what they do, electrical fittings is the last thing. वो इसमें कॉपर का लगा दे, कुछ लगा दे, एल्युमिनियम का लगा दे. उस तरह की तरफ उसने सिविल कंस्ट्रक्शन which takes about 80% and takes half the effort, आप उसका करके कम और उसको कर दिया, and you find that you are an L1. Now they will create a fight when the civil works is about to be completed. They will create a mess, or they will delay it and until such time that you say, Guruji, आप जाइए, we'll find someone else. So tender analysis, I mean, this is just one. I mean, I'm not mentioning other kind of things, So this is an issue which should really be taken upfront, whether it is an infrastructure project or a building project or whatever project you have. Tender analysis is yet another aspect. I have not also talked about the public-private partnerships. So I don't know whether I answered your questions, but I think, you know, I've had the good luck of change my. I never there too long in any place. FMS couple of years, NIPFP 4 years, 3.5 years, Planning Commission 1 year. I mean, kind of those things. The longest has been at the NCA year, which is my 22nd year. But it's a very adult, very meaningful crowd. But I mind my own business. I mean, I don't think I feel frustrated. If I want to work with somebody, I do so with all the humility, in the sense that I want to be a learner all my life. Because if I give up the attitude of a learner, what will happen? There will be a plateau. So I'll be called a learned person. मेरे को तो सब कुछ आता है, huh? Because learned, of course, is somebody that you give your dhanvat. I mean, there are not many. I have found one in Deepak where he is my land guru, but frankly speaking, one should remain a learner. One never has enough knowledge. There are always gaps in our knowledge, and we should really continue to learn. But the worst person is the learned person. अंग्रेजी के learned होता है ना, वो बहुत खतरनाक होता है, बहुत डिस्गस्टिंग होता है. वो तो सब कुछ आता है उसको. No, I even at this age, Deepak will vouch. I learn everything. When we do work in the domain that he's an expert, I always treat him as my guru. I try to learn. I try to understand what he's saying, not that I start with the presumption. ये तो मेरे करा हुआ है. You know, that attitude is a very suicidal one in life. That's more like of an old person telling you something, you know, with his experience. So that's not. But I found in my life, I learned from my granddaughters. I mean, my granddaughter, she was a year away from now. She was 9 then. She had come back from her primary school from a visit from. He says, Dadu, this is a very dirty place. This is your 24/7. वो डिब्बे आते हैं, डिब्बे में हैमबर्गर वगैरह ये होता खाना, उसको खाया और उसको ज़मीन में फेंक दिया. So these are 5-6 kids, about 20 to 25. Well, good life and everything. So there was nothing bad, but they threw that, and we were passing, and then my granddaughters, I have twin granddaughters. So one of these twins said, Dadu, look at this very dirty people here. So I said, why don't you pick, I mean, if you feel so bad, I mean, why don't you pick them up and throw this? But Dadu, there is no garbage thing. I said, but even so you can collect. She collected. And trying to put it there. Believe me, people are so fast. They're not obstinate. A couple of girls, those just held my granddaughters in their, hands and gave a hug, and and all the boys and girls collected all the, and after 3-4 days, you found those 2, bins, and now 4 bins. So I mean, little things matter. So one learns from everybody, all the time. I think that's where I think the good part is In education, the curve should be like this. It should never be like this. It should never be like this. And that is possible only when you know there is something more to learn. There is something that you still do not know. Only then we become, we get more knowledge, because there is no end to the knowledge that we have. Another thing was that I was a co-chair with Muhammad Yunus of Bangladesh on housing finance for the poor, which is ESCAP has brought that out. You can get a photocopy of it. Yeah. So yeah, that I. And then there was a very nice lecture, Nasir Munji and myself, to the 3rd International Conference in the US, Washington DC, the real estate people there.
I think I'll come by one of these days.
No, I'll decide. Yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you so much.